This is the amount of people searching for Leica M6 videos on YouTube. And this is the number of people looking for a W67. Well, who cares? I'm going to make a video on it anyway because this camera is amazing. And if you're into medium format photography, I think you'll find it interesting. If you've been around the film photography world for a while, I'm sure you've probably heard of the Makina 67 or the 670. Announced in 1978 and 84, those two cameras are almost cult classics, with super fast 80mm f2.8 lenses, which is around the 40mm f1.2 in the small format world. Those lenses, to me, and I don't say this lightly, are amongst the best lenses that I've ever used. But we're not going to be talking about them today. Instead, today we'll be focusing on the middle child of the family, the one that doesn't get enough attention, the one that no one is searching for. And as of making this video, there aren't many, if not any, videos here on YouTube taking an in-depth look at this camera. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to go over everything about the Makina W67 that makes it truly unique, the funny sounds that it produces, and at the end I'll also leave you with my secret, the one wish that I'd ask for if a camera genie appeared to me in my dreams and promised to give me anything that I could ever want in this camera world. So let's jump right in. All the color pictures that you're about to see today were developed with the Cinestill CS41 kit at home on a rotary processor. I'm so excited about this video because while I love all my camera babies that I've reviewed here on this channel, I love this one just a teeny bit more. Okay, quite a lot more. Visually and functionally, this camera is beautiful. You have a super portable folding camera that makes a huge negative, 6x7, but yet with its red button, you can push it and you're able to fold it down, making it even more compact than a Leica. It's much taller and heavier than a Leica, weighing in at around 1.2 kilograms, but it's still half the weight of a Pentax 6.7, which comes in just under 2.5 kg when fitted with an average sized lens. Just like its siblings, you're able to focus on the top with a beautiful rubber dial, and when lubricated, the focusing knob is really nice. This camera houses a 55mm lens, which on 6.7 is roughly 28mm on small format. With a slightly wider focal length, you're getting a deeper depth of field, and with that comes the ability to scale focus. If you want to do that, you'll find your distance markings in meters and feet on the focusing knob as well. Also on the top of the camera, you'll see your frame counter, which is quite an elegant one, along with a cold shoe. So there's no hot shoe on this guy, so if you want to use a flash, you've got to use a PC sync adapter on which you'll be able to mount a flash. The film advance is really nice too, and the word to me that best describes it is springy. The film advances in say a Leica feels more metal, like gears, precise and solid. The one on the Makina is slightly more like plushy, like you're jumping onto a large springy mattress. It begins with a little tension, then as you push the lever, as it gets to its peak, it increases in tension like you're pressing into a spring. It's quite hard to describe fully in words, but if you try it for yourself, you'll know what I mean. You adjust the shutter speeds and the aperture values on the lens using two bumps on either side. And while some people find this camera unintuitive to use, I've always found it just a joy. You do have to learn its rhythm as with any other camera, but once you do, it's super intuitive and fast. The way I use it, because with my 6.7 work, I mostly shoot still subjects. So on an average day out, I usually have my shutter speeds dialed in based on the light that I'm in. Usually I'm at 1/25th of a second on a cloudy day or in shade. But if it's super bright out and I have a ton of light to spare, or if I'm slightly too caffeinated, I'll go with 2/50th. And once I've got the shutter speeds preset, they're not going to change unless I'm going into a dramatically different lighting situation. So if you preset your shutter speeds, when you go to make a picture, the only thing that you need to adjust is your aperture values to fine-tune your exposure. The aperture ring is declicked, which feels great. You get an amazingly smooth throw between those ranges, and that's something that I do slightly prefer, just because it allows you to be a teeny bit more precise with your exposure. Now the aperture dial is on the left, which is a great thing because when you actually go to make a picture, to meter you'll need your right thumb to press a button on the back, and with your shutter speeds already preset, all you need to do is then use your left thumb to adjust the aperture to dial in the exposure. Right thumb meter, left thumb aperture. That's it. It's really, really straightforward. Then to actually make the picture, you'll be depressing the slightly raised shutter button on top. The shutter button on the W67 is much larger than a regular shutter button, but it doesn't go up as high, and in fact, it's pretty flush with the focusing knob, which to me is a great thing, reducing the chance of you accidentally pressing that button. The actual tension on the shutter button is really nice too. You know, sometimes with some cameras with a slightly stiff button, you're not able to press it down smoothly, and it causes the camera to have a slight shake or a jerk when you depress that button, making it really hard to use those cameras at slower shutter speeds. But with the W67, I found that it's really, really smooth, and I've been able to reliably handhold this camera with good technique down to around 1/8 of a second while still getting sharp results. And that's a huge benefit considering the slightly slow f4.5 lens on this camera. When it comes to how this camera sounds, it actually sounds quite interesting. And as far as shutters go, I really do like how the Makina sounds. Now, it's not as quiet as other leaf shutter lenses like a Rolleicord or a Rolleiflex, but it's definitely not as loud as a focal plane shutter. And it sounds pretty unique. I can't think of any other camera that sounds like this. And speaking of sounds, another funny quirk about this camera is that the frame advance almost has like a musical quality to it. Very interesting. Another thing that makes this camera stand out from other cameras is the meter in it. Unlike most cameras, which generally uses the entire frame to get exposure information, the W67 has a 20-degree spot meter, which is roughly the size of the focusing patch. So it's only going to tell you the exposure values of roughly what fits within that meter patch. And it's a great thing if you know how to use a spot meter. But if you don't, that's something to take note of. You can't just point this camera at a scene and expect that the meter would give you good exposure. You have to use it like a spot meter, which is slightly more complex. In general, you want to point the viewfinder patch at something that is roughly middle gray, which it could be like the mid-tone of someone's skin if you're making a portrait. Or say, for example, if you wanted to do something more precise, like placing your highlight values, you could use your meter in the W67 to expose for the highlights in your picture, where you still do want some texture, and then from there, give say 2.5 to 3 more stops of light, and by doing that, you'll know that your highlights will be safely within that zone 8 region. Now, if all this sounds new to you, check out the exposure zone system, but yeah, the Makina allows you to do that. In terms of the meter, I've always found it to be accurate, but it's also the first thing that is probably going to break down on you. So when buying one, make sure to check the meter thoroughly. Adjust it to all the different ISO values and make sure that the exposure reading changes. Now, to actually see those meter readings, you'll be looking through the viewfinder, and you'll see a plus and minus sign on the right. You do need to kind of align your eyes properly so that the meter reads on the black backing side on the right hand side. If your eye is slightly off angle, then those LED indicators would disappear, but so that's just something to take note of too. And speaking about viewfinders, the camera shows you where your frame begins and ends via frame lines at the corners. They're really bright and clear, so no complaints there, and there is built-in parallax correction, so the upper left frame line does move as you focus, which is a great feature to have. Now, there is quite a lot of distortion in the viewfinder, and that's actually the first thing that stood out to me about this camera, and it was something that I found to be a weakness at the start. But having used it for quite a while now, this might sound strange, but I've actually gotten quite fond of it. You see, with most rangefinders, if you're using an expensive, well-made one, most of the time the viewfinder is mostly distortion-free, which connects you more with the final output of the picture. But because the viewfinder in the W67 has quite a bit of distortion, it actually reminds me of like an instant camera. Now, I don't mean in terms of quality, because the glass is still really clear in the viewfinder, but the distortion creates a sense of disconnect with the final output of the picture. But the disconnect with the picture actually connects me more with reality, with what's in front of the camera. For example, with an SLR, because you're seeing exactly what you're making a picture of, there's this tendency to take direct control over your picture. You make tiny decisions within your frame, and as you adjust, you know you're directly influencing the look of your picture because, well, the picture is what you're actually seeing. And if you have used a camera with an EVF or say even an iPhone, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. But with the rangefinder, because what you're seeing isn't fully what you're making a picture of, especially if the frame is presented to you like how it is with the W67, with just the corners showing you where the edges features of your frame are, it kind of connects you less with that final output of the picture and more with the real world in front of you. And to me, that is at the very heart of what makes the rangefinder experience special compared to other cameras. It nudges you into the headspace of taking clippings, sections, segments of the real world that exists beyond your frame. And you're conscious of that because you actually see what is happening on the outside. And now add to that the viewfinder distortion of the W67, that effect is greatly exaggerated. So when you look through the viewfinder, you don't really see like picture, but a segment of the real world demarcated by the frame lines, which may or may not be a good thing for you, but that sense of more consciousness of what is actually in front of me and less of the actual picture is something that I've gotten really fond of over the years. So overall, this camera is an amazing one. I love the shooting experience of how it's designed. It's beautiful in terms of how it physically feels and how it looks. But above all those things, there is one thing that I prize most highly about this camera, and that is the lens that it has. Which, if you take a look at, the glass elements do look quite small, but don't let that size fool you. This camera is a beast. It's widely regarded as being amongst the best, if not the best, 55mm lens that you could possibly get in the 6-7 format. And having used quite a few lenses in my time in photography, I go as far as saying that this lens is amongst the best lenses that I've ever used. Pictures made with it have a tremendous amount of depth to them, an immense sense of space, width, and size. Subjects are rendered with so much three-dimensionality, and even wide open, you get a ton of detail and texture. And the overall nuance in the way that it renders tones is astounding. I absolutely love this lens, and aside from being a slightly narrower aperture, I've yet to come across a single picture where it has let me down. So those are all the things about this camera that makes it great. Now, what are its weaknesses? Some people say that it feels fragile, but to me it doesn't. In the hands, it feels solid and well engineered. Not quite the density of a Leica, but still very heavily built. The back door is made of metal, and overall it's quite solid and dense. When you squeeze it, it feels like a solid camera, and you might find the distortion in the viewfinder to be too much for you. So if that sounds like it might bother you, maybe check that out first. But there is one thing that you would probably want to consider about this camera, and that is its longevity and serviceability. There were only about 3,500 of these guys ever produced, which is really little. Like, why, right? It's such a sad thing. So due to its limited quantities, replacement parts are pretty much not sourceable. So if you want to get something replaced in it, you need to buy another piece and use that as a donor, slowly harvesting its organs. And on top of that, Makinas are known to be really difficult to service. And in fact, I've personally had some camera technicians turn me away from repairing them because they just didn't want to deal with it, which made me really sad. But there is one upside to its serviceability, and that is the W67 is a fully mechanical camera, meaning you only need a battery to operate the meter. So even without a battery, you'll be able to use it to make pictures, and because of that, it does something truly unique that other cameras don't do. Other popular 6.7 cameras like the Pentax 6.7 requires a battery to operate, or let's say the Mamiya 7, that's a fully electronic camera. But with the Makina W67, if the meter dies, you're still able to use it like a Leica M2 or an M3. But all that said, despite the serviceability concerns, I still really love this camera for its shooting experience, its portability, the lens that it has, the beautiful pictures that it makes. Adding to that, the fact that right now the prices aren't too high yet. Being only produced in such limited quantities, they're only bound to go up in price into the future. So if you're considering adding one to your toolbox, if you're able to find one in good condition, I 100% recommend checking it out. And if tonight a camera genie appears in my dreams to grant me any camera related wish, I think I'd ask for the Makina to be resurrected from the dead as a brand, and for them to start making and servicing these exact cameras again, maybe releasing different focal lengths, maybe an interchangeable lens system, and while they're at it, why not throw in a digital 6.7 sensor in there just for fun. Well, that's all for today's video. Let me know any of your thoughts in the comment section and I'll do my best to get to them. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.